Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bull Take Scouting Podcast. The Super Bowl might be right around the corner, but guess what? Draft season is well underway. And while we're all looking forward to that game down in Arizona, most people are in the NFL community all descended on Mobile, Alabama last week to watch the Senior Bowl, a week where it culminates in the game. But what's really most important is how these players perform in the practices, a lot of 1v1 settings, 7v7 drills that really show a lot to scouts, getting all these guys on the same field playing against each other. Alex, for you, who really stood out and it comes off the top of your head as one of the biggest winners of this week?
I mean, I think right off the top, Dewan Jones, the tackle from Ohio State. I mean, to be measured, the longest wingspan in Senior Bowl history. This is Senior Bowls. I think it's been going on for 74 years. To really, get that title is massive. I think also with his performance throughout the week as well, I'm pretty sure he's kind of bumping up his stock to a possible, early round two prospect, which is obviously a huge win because those early round two offensive tackles, one or two often hear their name called at the end of round one is a little bit of a surprise. So to have his name up there this early on in the process is probably pretty good thing for him.
Absolutely. He was completely dominant that first day. Ended up sitting out the rest of the week with an injury, but he really left his mark on that first day. And to me, honestly, I think he's still being really underrated. I actually have him rated as a mid-first rounder. I have him as my second rated offensive tackle, right behind Broderick Jones and right ahead of Paris Johnson and Peter Skoronski. Because what I see on tape is an absolute mammoth of a man who you cannot move back. He's got one of the best anchors that I've ever seen in pass protection. You would think that at his size, he can't get out in space and seal off the edge, but he's got pretty impressive lateral quickness, and he especially uses that length to hold the pass rushers off that arc. The one issue I see in pass protection is him getting beat on the inside at times, but it doesn't happen often. And I honestly think the only reason why he's not being talked about in the top tier of tackles and as a first-round lock is because of the lack of a precedent of an offensive tackle that big being that good in the NFL. And even if you look at Orlando Brown, who I think is probably the closest you can get, he's got about the same height, but he's a good chunk, 15, 20 pounds lighter. So I think that's what's scaring people away. But I want to trust the tape on this one and think that, Dewan Jones can be a Pro Bowl caliber offensive tackle in the NFL.
Yeah, as a Jets fan, I just get a little bit concerned because of the whole Mekhi Becton situation.
Yeah.
I mean, he showed a ton of promise his rookie year. And, I think that showing out is a better prospect than Becton was. But just that size, very similar size between the two. And we've seen Becton, marred by injuries these past few years, which is, really unfortunate. And, I don't want to make any predictions, but that's just a little bit concerning for me.
I do agree that I think you have to factor in that the durability could be an issue. But I mean, so far, so good with Dewan Jones, apart from this minor injury at the Senior Bowl. Now, another guy on the offensive line that really impressed me was John Michael Schmitz. He was someone who, coming into the week, I wasn't as high on as others because, as athletic as he was, I thought that he wasn't the strongest. And I think for the center position, it's really important to give your quarterback space and not really give up any ground, which I saw him doing sometimes. But, he came out there and he showed that really good athleticism. He showed a good enough anchor, and he showed his ability to really react to what the defensive lineman was offering him really quickly. So I think that a lot of teams are going to be comfortable with him being the quarterback of their offensive line, and that in a weak center class, Schmitz could potentially be knocking on the door of that round one, round two turn.
Yeah, I think we can run through a couple more guys that impressed this Senior Bowl. What about the running back Tank Bell?
Wide receiver.
Wide receiver Tank Dell. On tape, he was a little bit concerning for me just because of the size. I think he was measured at like 5'8", 165. So for me as a wide receiver, again, it kind of reminds me of that Tutu Atwell prospect where the size was a bit concerning, but he really flashed this whole week. He really showed his speed, his acceleration, on how dangerous he is with the ball in his hands. And to me, he showed both on tape and at the Senior Bowl that he's really elusive, and maybe that size won't play as much of a factor as I was thinking, before this week at the Senior Bowl.
Absolutely. I think Tank Dell's going to be a really good NFL player. And I think it's interesting how you bring up Tutu Atwell and how he hasn't really panned out and was a second round pick, probably in about the same range that Tank Dell will go. But Atwell really couldn't get off route contact. The second a defensive back had his hands on him, he was getting rerouted and really couldn't do anything from there on. I don't see the same thing with Dell. He does have a slighter frame, and he's obviously not the strongest guy. You're not going to be asking him to outmuscle anyone on a contested catch, but he can work through route contact. And as you said, he's a great athlete. He's dynamic. He's a real playmaker. He's a good route runner with the potential to get even better. So I like Tank Dell, and I think what he showed in the Senior Bowl is going to translate to the NFL, and he should be someone who's going around in the top 50 is where I have him.
Yeah, and I mean on tape as well, he showed his ability as a return man.
Oh, yeah.
And we saw a few games this NFL season where being a returner or in a dangerous returner at that is, a huge benefit to teams in close games. So I think the return ability from a guy like Dell should definitely be taken into account as well.
Absolutely. And now another guy who really brings that dynamic element to an offense, who really showed out the Senior Bowl as well, is Tulane running back Tyjae Spears. And I think he's an interesting evaluation because you want to fall in love with that dynamic ability. Well, as soon as he gets into space, he's so dangerous. He strings cuts together really well. He's elusive. He's got good acceleration. And he showed a lot of pass catching ability at the Senior Bowl. So there's a lot to work with there. I'm just not sure how he projects as a runner between the tackles. And so I'm not saying don't draft Tyjae Spears because I think he can be a really good element to an offense. I think he would just be best used as like a change of pace or even like a 1B option to, a stronger back who can handle the load and handle short yardage situations where power is more important. That's how I see Tyjae Spears fitting in the NFL, and he really did show that in the Senior Bowl practices that he's got that explosive element.
Yeah, I think I've kind of heard that he might be trending up to that round 2 conversation, and I think especially in today's NFL where you are kind of leaning towards that running back by committee approach, I think late round 2 might be a solid option for him. Round 2, early round 3, because you mentioned that receiving ability. Yeah, he might not be a guy that can hammer it in that short yardage situation, but on third downs, obvious passing situations, and then obviously, like you mentioned, as that change of pace back, I think he could be really beneficial to an NFL team.
Absolutely. One last offensive guy before we move over to the other side of the ball, who I think really stood out, was Michigan State wide receiver Jayden Reed. He's a guy who really does everything well. I mean, he's got good route running ability, definitely showed that at the Senior Bowl, is getting consistently open in that way. He's got good strength to work through route contact. He's a solid athlete. He gets the contested catch. I'm really looking at Jayden Reed as someone who I think is going to be a steal in this draft, even after his stock going up at the Senior Bowl, because right now he's probably still in that round 3 range. And I have a late round 2 grade on Jayden Reed because I think he can be such a solid wide receiver too, who can succeed running a diverse route tree. And you can really ask anything of him and he's going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I think that is a good way to round out the end of our offensive winners for the Senior Bowl week. Now let's move into our defensive winners. And Kosta, I'll let you take this one first. Who stood out the most to you on the defensive side of the ball?
I'm going to go with Adetomiwa Adebare. And I will admit that I was rehearsing how to pronounce his name because he absolutely deserved that name recognition and everyone knowing how to say it after this week. He's a guy who came in as maybe a borderline day 2 player and was one of the most unblockable players at the Senior Bowl. He's got good athleticism, good length, good power. You want to see more consistency on tape out of his ability to deploy pass rush moves and go in with a plan. But he showed pass rush moves at the Senior Bowl, and he's a guy who's rising fast. I mean, we've even heard from certain reporters that he could be pushing into the round 1 discussion in terms of one of those guys who ends up being a surprise first-round pick. I wouldn't go quite that high with Adebare, but he's definitely one of the biggest winners, maybe the biggest winner of anybody at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, going from, that round 3 projection to possibly a late round 1 projection is obviously huge. I think he also showed some versatility. I think he lined up at both defensive end and defensive tackle this week. He also weighed in heavier than expected, which is always good. I thought when I was looking at his measurements pre-Senior Bowl, I thought he was a little bit of a tweener almost at the defensive tackle position. So being able to show versatility between defensive end and defensive tackle and weighing in at what he weighed in at, I think is definitely a huge plus for him.
Yeah, I like that you bring that up because while we're talking so much about these guys having been dominant on the football field, a lot of them came in with good measurements that really helped them out. Like, for example, going back to Ty J. Spears, he added 10 pounds. He's kind of a slighter back, showed that he was able to add that weight and still looked really explosive. So often you can already get an edge right off the bat with that measurement and then go confirm your stellar play on the field. So who's another guy on the defensive side that you think really upped his stock this week?
I think Sidney Brown, the defensive back from Illinois. I think he was flying all over the field this week. On tape, I saw a really good tackler. I know we kind of harp on this with safeties, but tackling to both of us is a huge positive when it comes to safeties and really important thing to have. But I just think that he showed his football IQ is there as well. He was going all over the field from that spot, and I just think he had a really, really solid week and is bumping up in his draft projection.
Yeah, he reminds me of Jalen Petrie, who last year came in as a maybe third round guy, ended up showing out at the Senior Bowl. Even though he came in as someone regarded as more of a run defender, was great in coverage drills, ended up going top 40 and was one of the best defensive rookies in the league. And I could see Sidney Brown following the same trajectory because Brown was outstanding in man coverage at the Senior Bowl, be it against running backs, tight ends, or even wide receivers. And we didn't see him getting as many opportunities in coverage on tape. So it was really good to be able to see that he excels in that regard. So right now, it's hard to find weaknesses to me in Brown's profile. He doesn't really stand out as elite in one category, especially in terms of traits, but he's a good athlete. He's got a good build. He's strong. He's a good run defender with a good read and react ability, solid tackling, and he can cover really well. So he's someone who, for me, is contending for the top safety spot, and that says a lot because people are really high on Brian Branch, but I'm just going point by point in what you're looking for in a safety, and I might end up putting Sidney Brown over Brian Branch at the safety position.
Yeah, I think definitely the Jalen Petrie comp is really a great comp. Another one that I thought of, Kirby Joseph, who also elevated his stock at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
And who, another one, great Senior Bowl week, obviously did not get drafted as high as Petrie, but he had another stellar rookie season for the Lions.
And coming out of that same defense, which you don't want to scout the helmet, but if you've got someone from one position performing really well and outdoing their draft stock, it's going to make you more comfortable drafting from that same position on the same team and coming from the same defensive scheme. So that definitely bodes in Sidney Brown's favor. Now, another guy who I think was really impressive was Keanu Benson, and he's also going to be rising and someone that I'm grading kind of in that upper portion of round 2, which a lot of these Senior Bowl winners are falling in that range for me because you don't get too many first-round talents showing up to the Senior Bowl, but you got to get guys who are pushing into that higher day 2 category who really, really stand out and for me earn top 50 grades. And Benton showed that he has tremendous pass rush ability with really good athleticism, showed some pass rush moves, and that's something that's so highly valued in the NFL. So he's a guy that I think is really rising.
Yeah, I think those are a good couple defensive guys that stood out. Any other ones that stood out to you, Kosta?
Yeah, I want to say a word about Darius Rush, the cornerback from South Carolina, who, to me, if it wasn't for his injury history, I think we'd be talking about a top 50 lock and maybe even a first-round pick because he's got good size, good length. He's sticky in coverage. He often anticipates routes well. There's really not many holes you can pick in his game. The biggest problem is he has missed more than half of his college career with injury. He redshirted in 2018. Missed all but 2 games in 2019, same thing in 2020, and played most of the season in 21 and 22, but missed a couple games in each of those seasons. So when you look at the overall bill of health, there's too much there really to warrant anything more than a round 3 pick for me. But if he can somehow stay healthy, which he's been doing a better job of the last 2 years, I think Darius Rush can be a steal, and he showed all of that ability at the Senior Bowl for that, showing the upside that he has if his health can check out.
Yeah, I think moving on from some defensive winners from the Senior Bowl week. Obviously, there's winners. There's always losers.
Mhm.
There are a couple big name defensive players this week that struggled the whole week, and their stock seemed to drop at least you know half a round or so. The one that I want to mention, Andre Carter, the defensive
Mhm.
end from Army. Coming into the season, I was a really big fan of his. I loved the size, the length, the athletic ability. Um, to me, on film, it just looked like he wasn't as strong as you'd expect a guy that was 6'7" to be. He had a little bit thinner of a frame, and that carried through into this year. I think he lacked a little bit in some pass rush moves, and he really relied on his speed and athleticism to beat tackles. And I think that really showed up this week. We saw time and time again where he was getting beaten once offensive linemen got their hands in his chest. So I think there was that early round two potential for him just because of his size and athletic ability. I think he might be falling to possibly a round three prospect now, which is unfortunate. But I do expect him to still be a really good player in the NFL. I think assuming he could put on, you know, 10, 15 pounds of muscle in an NFL weight room with NFL nutrition. I think that can go a long way for him, but just not a great week for Andre Carter.
I agree. He's probably the biggest loser of this week. And you mentioned how he gets beat easily when a offensive lineman gets his hands into his chest. What's also concerning is he does have good length, so he often manages to win that battle and get into the offensive lineman's chest, but then he doesn't manage to move the offensive lineman at all, which is pretty rare. Usually, when you see a defensive lineman getting their hands into the opponent's chest, they manage to generate some movement. For him, there really isn't much, which shows that he does need to hit an NFL weight room really hard, gain some muscle, gain some strength, and I think that's going to be a little bit more of a developmental process than we might have hoped for with Carter. So he might be a guy who goes around 3 or 4, like you mentioned. So I think that's a little unfortunate for him to have not performed as well as we would have hoped. I think another defensive lineman who I was really high on, and I would have expected to perform better, was Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame, because I think he's a really well-rounded guy who's got good speed, good strength, and on tape, I saw a decent array of pass rush moves. I saw some ways in which he could win with his hands. Now, the Senior Bowl, it seemed like he really just didn't have a plan for a lot of his 1v1 reps, and he disappointed in that regard. So that's a guy who I'm going to have to reevaluate a little bit, because I had him as a mid to late first round pick, and he didn't look like a first rounder at the Senior Bowl. So I was disappointed by Foskey.
Yeah, I definitely think that he's another guy that lowered his stock. I definitely wasn't as high on him coming into the season as you were, but I definitely thought that he could be, that mid first round talent guy. And I agree, he didn't really show it this week. I felt like throughout watching his tape, the biggest issue to me was lack of pass rush moves. And that definitely showed this week. Like you mentioned, it looked like he was going into a lot of reps really without a plan, just kind of trying to do it on the fly. That's not going to work at the NFL level. I think he tried to rely too much on, his strength and ability to kind of muscle past offensive linemen. And we mentioned a few offensive linemen that had really good weeks, and it seemed to be decent talent there at the Senior Bowl on the offensive line side of the ball. So definitely not a great week from Foskey either.
Yeah. And so on this loser side, let's flip to the offense. And I think we could lump the whole quarterback position into this category. We knew going into the Senior Bowl that this was not as nearly as talented a crop of passers as we've seen in the past. We've seen Justin Herbert perform in this competition, Dakota Prescott as well. But this group was not talented, and no one really stood out. We were kind of hoping someone would emerge. You could argue Jake Hayner had a decent week, but overall, I was disappointed with a lot of these guys. Max Duggan looked pretty rough. Jaron Hall was someone who, I thought would be worth a shot in the third round because he's got plus arm strength. He's a good athlete. Just really need to develop him, but he struggled too. So, the quarterbacks really didn't perform well. And thinking about it, this is probably the worst group of quarterbacks that I've seen at a Senior Bowl in the last 5-10 years.
Yeah, I mean Tony Pollard, a guy that we respect pretty highly in the NFL draft circle, said that he's been going to the Senior Bowl since 2000, and this was the worst quarterback class that he saw there. But it was really disappointing. Like you mentioned, you threw out a few names that we've seen at the Senior Bowl before. Like you mentioned, Justin Herbert, Prescott, Jalen Hurts also
Yeah.
was at the Senior Bowl. And I feel like more quarterbacks are declaring early for their. I mean, why wouldn't you, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to be a top, round one, even round two prospect at this point, why would you go back for another season? So I think we're just going to start to see that with the quarterback talent start to decline as we continue to go through the years. And I really think that has kind of happened because teams are more and more willing to take developmental prospects or kind of boomer bust guys ever since probably Josh Allen, I think,
Mhm.
was, or Mahomes too. Mahomes and Allen in back-to-back years. I think most people kind of thought of them as raw with a lot of talent, but they needed some time to develop. And I think that younger QBs are seeing this, and maybe they show all the skills, need their their tools refined a little bit, and might as well declare early. I think um, Anthony Richardson is an example of that, where maybe if he stayed another year in college, probably refine his skill set a little bit, possibly go to the Senior Bowl next year. Instead, he's coming out. So I think that's what we're starting to see with quarterbacks, and a little unfortunate for the Senior Bowl.
I think that's a fantastic point. And Mahomes, Herbert, Lamar Jackson too, they really changed how teams are drafting quarterbacks, and they are more willing to bank on these projects and trusting their coaching staffs to develop them because those guys came in pretty raw and turned into superstars in the league. And as you said, I think Richardson, Will Levis too, can really thank them because if these guys were coming out at this point in the early to mid 2010s, I don't think we're talking about first rounders. It's really the precedent of the few guys that we've mentioned who have been able to show that projects can work out the quarterback position, and as you said, it's affecting the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, and we have a question here that says, was the QBs or did the defenses have good players? I think it's both, right? I think the defense did have a lot of good players at the Senior Bowl, but I just think going into the Senior Bowl, the QBs were at a lower talent tier than what we're used to. So I think we were expecting one or two of them to kind of elevate themselves above the other. And just unfortunately, I don't think anyone did. I think, if anything, some of them might have lowered their stock a little bit coming out of Senior Bowl week.
Yeah, I'd say there were definitely instances where it was just, the defense was outplaying the offense and the quarterback couldn't do much about it. But also, so much of these quarterbacks, or so many of these quarterbacks, really struggled in the 7v7 drills because they just couldn't process what was going on fast enough. And they would, instead of trying to fit the ball into a tight window, trying to get a big play, they would just resort to their check down option. And that happened time and time again. And that's just not how you stand out at the Senior Bowl. And that's kind of doesn't have much to do with what the defense was offering. It's just that they struggled in the Senior Bowl setting, which is one that if you're going to be a successful quarterback in the NFL, you're probably coming in with a good grasp of it and being able to perform, even if it is new players, new plays, etc.
Yeah, and Javier, another point about Anthony Richardson. I know it's a Senior Bowl recap, but we're wrapping up Senior Bowl talk anyways. So Anthony Richardson will have to sit at least 1 year. What do we think? I think yes.
Yeah.
I mean, no one has to do anything. They can throw him into the fire if they want, but I think his development would be – he would benefit highly by sitting out a year and just kind of being able to learn the NFL game, kind of learn to read defense a little bit better and refine his skills because the raw talent is there, the arm strength, the athleticism. But I think, we saw obviously Mahomes is a special case because he's a special player. Would he be where he is right now if he didn't sit out that first year? We don't really know. But I think most rookie quarterbacks would probably benefit by sitting out the first year.
I totally agree with that take on Richardson. And I think before we get off the air, I mentioned the Super Bowl coming up. It's the biggest event in football. And I know we focus on the draft, but I don't think we can get off the air without giving Super Bowl predictions. So, Alex, do you want to give us yours?
Yeah, I got to ride with my guy, our guy, Britton Covey that we interviewed.
Sure.
The pre-draft process. I'm going with the Eagles, and I the Chiefs have a lot of talent on offense. Obviously, they have Andy Reid. Obviously, they have Patrick Mahomes. Um, but time and time again, um, we've seen, you know, the top defenses in the league win these close games. I know the last time the Chiefs won, they played the 49ers. That 49ers defense was winning for the first, 50 minutes of the game. And then I think, the offense kind of sputtered a little bit and opened the door. So I'm going with the Eagles. I think their offense is also very talented, but that defense and that pass rush, I think is very, very good.
I'm gonna go with the Chiefs. And I think I don't want to, count out the Eagles, and full credit to what they've done to get here, but it's the biggest stage that it gets, and it's hard to see such a young quarterback and such a young head coach in Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni being able to outduel two guys that are so established, have already won a ring together, have been to a different Super Bowl in which they failed against the Bucks. They've learned from it. I trust Andy Reid and his offensive brilliance. I trust Patrick Mahomes, his experience, his ability to make plays. And not to say that Sirianni's not a brilliant coach. He absolutely is. And not to say that Jalen Hurts is not a great player in this league. I think he will be. But I think we started to see some areas where he could falter in the NFC Championship game. It obviously didn't end up mattering because, we know what happened with the 49ers quarterback situation in terms of injuries. I just think I'm going to bank on the experience of Reid and Mahomes versus Sirianni and Hurts on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we could say this every Super Bowl. It definitely could go either way. It'll be fun to see. Let's just give Howie Roseman a shout out, though. I mean, he does year after year. I mean, we doubt him time and time again, but they're in the Super Bowl. They also have a top 10 pick in the NFL draft coming up. So he's just been working his magic, building really good team after really good team. They made the Super Bowl 5 years ago, and they have probably 85% roster turnover since then, and they're back in the Super Bowl.
Exactly.
Different quarterback, different wide receivers, different running back. The defense is all rebuilt besides a few guys on the defensive line. Really, really impressive what Howie Roseman's doing.
I agree. It's stuck in our heads that Howie Roseman's a bad GM because he has missed horrendously a couple times on receivers. Can't deny that. But, that offense, every single player on that offense was drafted while Roseman was in the front office, with the exception of A.J. Brown, who he is the one who he traded for. So it's a roster entirely assembled by Howie Roseman. His fingerprints all over it. Definitely give him some credit. And as you said, this is going to be a fun one. This can go either way. And it's honestly one of the most open Super Bowls that I've seen in a while, where there really is no big favorite, and it should be a really fun game. I think it could be a high-scoring one, too. So sit back, enjoy. Let's watch some good football.
Yeah, before we hang up, I want to give myself a shout out. Before the season, I did name the Eagles as one of the teams I did not think would make it back to the playoffs. So, that was a great call, but, we all have those.
Absolutely.
But, it's just ever since they made their little playoff run, I was reminded of that. So, yeah. Thanks, everyone, for watching. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the Super Bowl. After the Super Bowl, we'll be back with another mock draft, and everyone will be in full NFL draft season. So, again, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with another episode soon.